Hello, everybody. I want to just welcome you all again to this 20th episode. Let's see if I can get some party action going here. Is it going to work? There we go. Okay, a little party action because this is the 20th episode of Stefan's Photobook show. And, it's cause to celebrate. Um, for those of you who don't know the show, Stefan looks at recent and not so recent photo related books that you might or might not know about. And today's theme is Formalism is Everything, looking at the work of Jan Groover and others. Stefan is an artist and a photographer living in Germany, and he teaches a variety of classes for us here at StrudelmediaLive, from surrealism and gestalt to mentoring intensives and many other things as well. Thank you all for joining us. Let me let somebody in. This talk will be about an hour or so long, and I want to thank Stefan for yet another episode of his photo book show. So take it away, Stefan.
Thank you so much for having me for the 20th time, and thank you all for being here. So I'm very excited that we made it this far to the 20th episode. So that's cause for celebration for me too. And I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces, but also so many new faces here. For those of you who are new to this will always be two parts. There will be a short introductory part about the topic, and then I will look at these pile of books that I have here on my left. And as we're talking today about formalism, let's start right away. Today we'll be talking about formalism. And this formalism, this idea of formalism is everything. This is from a quote from the artist we'll be featuring today, from Jan Groover, from one of her lectures that she gave. This is pretty much her philosophy, and we'll look today at what this actually means. So let me start a little bit sideways here. So I don't know how many of you have already seen The Brutalist, movie with Adrian Brody. He runs in the Oscar races, so he is nominated for a couple of prizes there: best movie, best director, I think. And although this is a deeply flawed film, starting with the title that you see on screen, that is where it already starts to be historically very incorrect, because brutalism is an architectural movement that was coined by a British critic in the 50s, so way later, and at another place where the movie is. And the movie is full of these kinds of historical inaccuracies. It still is. It still has its moments, and I just want to mention this here. Adrian Brody is in it. He somehow has a subscription for these kinds of figures that he's playing here, and he's playing this very intense. He's playing an Hungarian Jewish architect who has to migrate from, who has to flee from the war, comes to the US. And the reason why I'm talking about him here is that he claims that he, as an architecture, was trained at Bauhaus in the 20s. And he then went on to build houses in Budapest, and then comes to the US to wants to restart his career there. And although, as I said, the picture is flawed in many ways, it is also a beautiful picture. It has some stunning images in there, but it also has, next to these historical inaccuracies that are there all over the place, it has this at its core, this idea that there are a lot of artists, architects, designers that went from Europe to the US and wanted to restart their career there. And this is where we start off. So we start off basically here. So he came from, so in the movie, he comes from the Bauhaus. This is, it was a art and design and architecture school founded in 1919, moved in the 20s to from Weimar, where it was founded, to Dessau. And it is pretty much the foundation of European modernism. There were a lot of important figures from architecture there, like Mies van der Rohe, Moholy-Nagy, that all went, Walter Gropius, who all went to have an important architectural career, international career from there. There was also people like Johannes Itten. He was one of the most famous teachers there. He taught in what was called the Vorkurs, so the basic courses of Bauhaus. This is where they try to lay a foundation for pretty much all the things that were taught in Bauhaus. He eventually wrote this book, Design and Form, wonderful book, where he described the contents of this basic course at the Bauhaus and later. He also went to have a successful career after the Bauhaus had closed in the 30s. He went to Swiss and continued his teachings there. This is basically the structure of what they taught at Bauhaus. So there was this basic course, which contained this elementary study of form, study of materials in the preliminary workshop. But it had nature studies, studies of equipment and tools. It had the various forms of art production with stone, wood, clay, metal, textile, color. And in the center where there was building and design, the experimenting building side, building and engineering sides. So as you see here, Bauhaus was they had an holistic approach. So everything was integrated. There was not a lot of difference made between the different art form, between design and art, between design and textile design, between design and architecture. All of this was part of a conjoined syllabus for the Bauhaus. In his book, this is what he is talking about the theory of colors, materials, and texture studios, and we will here focus on this, on the theory and practice of forms, because this was one of the roots for what would eventually become the idea of formalism, the idea to deal with basically theory and practice of forms. And Johannes Itten was one of the teachers there that founded this. And when you look at his books, they deal with very basic things like a point, a line, a plane, volume, thick and thin, high and low, broad and narrow. And he was trying to teach how to deal with these kinds of basic elements of form and make pictures out of them, or make a rug out of them, or use it to build a building out of it. Transparent, opaque, smooth, rough, rest, motion, much, little. These are the kind of things that were taught at the Bauhaus at a very basic level. And as you see here, all these things have to do with the pictorial plane. So it is not about what you see in there or what you do with it, but this is something that is an overarching element here. His way of teaching was to define problem sets. So with problem sets, he meant something like deal with light and dark, with the difference between light and dark. And he said about his studies to present the principles of creative composition to the students for their future career as artists. The laws of form and color opened up to them the world of objectivity. As the work progressed, it became possible for the subjective and objective problems of form and color to interact in many different ways. So he wanted to give them practical problems that they can solve with, that they can respond to, either with a painting or with a textile design or with a photograph. And this is how his students responded to this. So this is a study of the disposition of light and dark values in the subject of a jumping dog. So this is jumping dog from one of his students, done in 1929. And these kinds of studies help his students to understand what happens, what are the relations between light and dark, and what does it do to my picture when I distribute light and dark in these kinds of values. He also did these kinds of material effects. So he wanted to know, when you look at different materials, what kind of structures do they show, and how do these structures end up in, for example, a photograph? And these are, apart from being very simple studies, they end up being the cornerstone of a lot of artists that made these kind of studies and used these knowledge that they gained from doing these kind of studies for their own work. And as you see here, he is, it doesn't matter in which medium you do this. You can do this either with a drawing or a painting. You can respond with a photograph like this one here, or you can respond to his problem sets with a three-dimensional sculpture. So all of these were methods that he tried to employ. At the core of this is an elementary study of form as a basis for all these undertakings. But it was not only about this. So the Bauhaus was also a social experiment. It was a social experiment of how to live together and how to work together in an artistic and architectural and design practice to basically use sound, scientific, and artistic principles to build a better world. This is basically what the Bauhaus people believed in. And they believed in this social practice of working together. They also, Bauhaus was also one of the first institutes who had a high rate of female students there. Until then, in Europe and especially in Germany, it was not, women were not allowed to study, especially not study art. And the Bauhaus opened that up, and many women used the opportunity to gain such a to get such an education here. And one of these examples is Florence Henry. She used mainly photography to express herself, and she always uses these kinds of principles of form, of continuation, of basic principles of form in her photography. Basic ways to arrange things and talk about how forms can be arranged into pictures. As I said, Johannes Itten was an idealist. He studied Persian Zoroastrism and early Christianity. So his belief was really that it's not only about forms, colors, but it is, he helps students to discover his forms and colors, is helping them to discover themselves. So this was his belief. So this idea of formalism is everything has a broader meaning for the people that studied and taught at Bauhaus. Many women were there, especially in the textile design classes there. This is Annie Albers. She used textile to express herself. Things like this. This is Vasily, the chair designed by Marcel Breuer. They had their origin there, so it was independent of how you express yourself. If you design a chair, or if you make a rug, or if you make a painting, the principles underneath it are always the same. Of course, that also went into architecture. This is why Laszlo Todd, the hero of the Brutalists, this is where he got his education from. Basically, the movie is referring to people like Walter Gropius, who was teaching at Bauhaus, and he was one of the most famous architects of that time and also after the war. And this was their principle. We searched for basis on which to build a new practical approach to life for ourselves and our work. So this was not only about making good chairs or making good rugs. It was about changing the world with design. Of course, this was not only about form, this was also about color. So one of the most prominent teachers of Bauhaus was this guy. This was Josef Albers. He wrote a very important book, Interaction of Color, where he looked at exactly what the title says, the interaction of colors. How can color be used? How do colors relate to each other? What he wanted to do, he wanted to lay a foundation for how we use color in all our practices. And this is an interesting edition. This has been printed and reprinted numerous times and has been the basis for the education for many designers, for many artists, for many painters, and has been reprinted numerous times. Like this one here, this edition is from the 70s, which has this wonderful plates in there with these very iconic 70-ish colors in there. But the book is extremely methodical. So it's extremely methodical how he approaches how he approaches color and how he approaches the various combinations that color can form. And if you read through this table of contents, you can see two things: how thorough Albers is in tackling his subject, but also the love that he puts into these kinds of studies. This is not only about a scientific approach to it. This is really about falling in love with color. And Maggie Nelson, who wrote a wonderful book, Bluets, she said something like that: suppose I were to begin by saying that I had fallen in love with the color. I think we have to understand that for the Bauhaus people, this was an intimate love affair with design and with color and with form. Albers himself, he continued with these color field paintings. This is Homage to the Square from 1959. But Bauhaus was a social experiment, and it was obvious that the social experiment was not to be tolerated by the Nazis. So it soon became very clear that the way they approached and the way they wanted to change the world was not in line with how the Nazis thought how they wanted to change the world. That had numerous reasons. There were many people with Jewish inheritance there. There were many women. The role of women at Bauhaus was completely different than in the rest of the society, and especially different for what the Nazis had in mind. So eventually the Bauhaus was shut down in 1933, which resulted in great many people that had to flee, that came from Bauhaus. And this is the historic core of the Brutalists. So there is a truth to that. Josef Albers himself, he went to another incarnation of Bauhaus. It was the Black Mountain College that was in
North Carolina.
North Carolina, right, in North Carolina. Thank you. And it also had this wonderful building to them. So, and they tried to emulate a similar joy to designing. So this was basically a way to adapt these core of these European art and design models and transport them to the US. Eventually, Josef Albers ended up there, and he ended up teaching like this here, a drawing class at Black Mountain College. So from what you can read about the Black Mountain College, it had a very similar vibe. It lay in a beautiful nature. It had this collegiate aspects to it. And it had this enormous number of people that went through this education there, like people like Walter Gropius taught there, Robert Motherwell, Willem de Kooning, John Cage famously made his first performance in the Black Mountain College. Robert Rauschenberg was there. So all of these people from America now got into connection with people from America, and there was a fruitful interaction between these two continents that happened in there. And this is why I showed you this art review article on the at the beginning on the Brutalist, which is very interesting because this is what is missing from the film. So this kind of collegiate atmosphere, people that work together on a thing, that is blatantly missing in there. Pretty much everybody who went to Black Mountain College became some kind of famous. So Robert Motherwell did these kinds of wall paintings after he left Black Mountain College. And you can clearly see the lineage from the Bauhaus and the strong forms that you have in here into his work. And you see Josef Itten here. You see you see Josef Albers here and his interaction of colors. Interestingly enough, I did not know that Robert Rauschenberg was in there, and I had no idea on how to interpret his color fields in his images. But now that I know that, it becomes very clear that he was exposed to the ideas of Josef Albers and these interaction of colors. And you also see this material studies from Bauhaus that somehow rubbed off on him. And this, for example, is an early material study by Josef Albers that he did at the Bauhaus. So you see similarities that eventually made it into the abstract expressionism of US painters. Frank Stella is obviously also influenced by these kinds of color field studies. You see the lineage here. It was not always this kind of American pop arty way of interpreting color and dealing with form. People who stayed in Europe, like Giorgio Morandi, they had different ways to deal with form. Giorgio Morandi made these still lifes for all his life, but he was also trying to find out how do things work together? What happens when I combine different colors in this way? It was not only painting, it was not only architecture, but it also was sculpture. So you find these ideas about line and design and form that originated with Itten. You find them in the sculptures of, for example, for Anthony Caro with this Month of May from 1963. But of course, this idea of that when you make a painting, when you make a sculpture, when you make a movie, when you make a textile, basically what you're doing is you have a formal problem and you try to solve it. That influenced, of course, a lot of photographers too, especially Stephen Shore with his large format camera, where he spends an endless amount of time to get everything right in his photo, to arrange everything that you see in his frame in a way that it fits together. He often used this this term here, solving pictures. And again, this idea of solving pictures, solving formal problems. This is something that is on the mind of a lot of artists, and especially also on a lot of photographers. Which, of course, brings us to Jen Groover. Jen Groover comes from has grown up in the New York scene there, so she was exposed to these kinds of influences, and she started with studying painting at Pratt Institute in Ohio. She received a Bachelor of Fine Arts, got a Master of Arts at Ohio State University. So she originally started with painting. So we can safely assume that she was exposed to these kinds of painterly educations. But it started to change for her when she picked up a camera. So when she picked up a camera, she pretty much realized immediately that this was what she was about, what she was after. So all of a lot of the quotes, a lot of the ideas come from this film here on Jane Groover. This is Tilting at Space. Great film. You can find it on Vimeo from Checkerboard Films. If you find the time, it's really great to see her live. So it contains, it shows her in a studio. It shows her with her student talking about her own work, talking about students' work. It shows her arranging these tiny little still lifes that she photographed all the time. And this, for me, made the connection to the Bauhaus, because Jan Groover was extremely practical. It was about solving practical, formal problems with a camera. And I enjoyed listening to her, because she's a very unartsy person. So she's a very practical person that has very practical photographic problems that she's trying to solve. Her breakthrough came basically with this series. She turned her camera to her kitchen sink. So this is where she made her first images. This is Kitchen Sink series from 1978. Basically, she put all the stuff that she found in her kitchen and threw it into the kitchen sink and started photographing it and started arranging it. And this eventually got her as one of the first photographers on the cover of art forums. So not only did she reinvent the idea of still life for photography, she was also one of the first photographers who managed to somehow wedge herself into the art world. At that time, at the end of the 70s, these were still two very different things. So there was photography, which was associated mainly with documentary photography, with reportage. And there was the art world, which dealt with painting, which dealt with these formal problems. And she's managed, with her kitchen sinks here, she somehow managed to bridge this gap and helped bringing photography into the art world with her series. And the question, when you look at pictures like this, is what is it about? And I will not answer that, but I will post this from Jen Groover herself. So she said to this, what is it about? When you're inside the woods, you no longer care about the trees. So it is not important that it is kitchen utensil that she's photographing. What is important are the formal problems, and solving the formal problems of arranging light, managing space, managing color, talking about interactions of color. This is being in the woods. You no longer care about the trees. So the question, what are the pictures about, doesn't really have an answer for her. For her, the question is not really relevant. in a way, which is very different from the other approaches to photography that always are about something, about an important historic event, about important buildings, something like that. So this is for her what formalism is everything means. And let me try to end this little introduction here with this thing here. So this formalism is everything is, this is Werner's Nomenclature of Colors. This was an important book of the 19th century. Basically, the German scientist, I forgot, Abelard Werner, he wrote up all colors that exist. So starting with snow white, reddish white, purplish white, yellowish white. It's a tiny little difference between colors. So this is the other meaning of formalism is everything. Everything has colors. So colors are everywhere, and dealing with colors, there are nuances, there are tiny differences. This is basically dealing with everything. And Josef Albers himself, he made this quote, which I find, which really resonated with me, especially in these times where there's a lot of turmoil in the world. He said, at an age where there was also a lot of turmoil in the world, an age which human sensibility has become such an obvious need in all areas of human involvement, color sensitivity and awareness can constitute a major weapon against forces of insensitivity and brutalization. I find this quote very interesting because there's a lot of pressure on the art world right now. So pressure to say something to how the world is, to be political, to talk about inclusion, diversity, to talk about politics. There is the other pressure of defunding, where in Berlin, for example, the funds for arts have been slashed by half almost. So there's a lot of pressure upon the arts. And the question, why do we do that? Why does it interest us? Why are we dealing with this? And why are we dealing with formal problems of color and design and form? And this somehow summons this up for me, why I am interested in this. But let's come to the important things now. Let me start with this. So this is basically the reason why we're here today. So although Jan Groover was at her time very famous, the Art Forum cover put her on the map. After that, she was forgotten pretty much. So there is not a lot of books that have made it. She wasn't working in an area where photographs were necessarily making photo books, and the idea of her, the way she works, was not really inherent to do photo books. So she was not interested so much into making large sequences of images or telling a story with a photo book. So this is the reason why she was working mostly in exhibitions. So she had her time in the 80s and 90s, and then she was pretty much forgotten. So after her death in 2014, I guess, she donated all her whole archive to the Musée des Lycées in Lausanne. And they made a big retrospective of her work. And from this retrospective, this catalog came out. And this is one of the few books on her work that I managed to get. And I just stumbled upon this recently. And as it is a retrospective, it has these ideas of telling her who she was, what she does, what her interests are, but showing the core of this, showing chronologically her photographs. So from her early works, when she was still working in black and white, when she was still interested in basic modes of perception. I find this here conceptually highly interesting. This is what we will be talking about in Things on Table, the idea to conceptualize the still life. This is an interesting picture that we see here. It suggests that there is some kind of continuation between the left and the right. But when you examine it closer, you will see that the left and the right do not fit together. So this is not the same cup that you see here. But this is, of course, what we are led to believe. So all these kinds of ideas about perception, how we interpret a picture, this was what was interesting to me. This is also one of these interesting pictures of that time, the idea of continuation. So applying basic modes of perception, that we always think that there is some kind of continuation here. So these things here somehow belong together. And she subverts this with dropping into a totally different scale here. For her, what she was photographing was not important. So all of these is about the formal aspects of a street. So in this picture, for example, it is important for her that the street shows different rhythms, and these different rhythms will end up on a picture. And when she photographs cars, so for her, cars are objects. For her, these are not cars, they are image producing objects. So they exist in the world to make a picture. Of course, the book tells us about her old work, but where it really begins and where it really shines is on her kitchen sink series. This is basically what kickstarted off her career. These are just gorgeous reproductions of the images, you know, of the whole kitchen sink series. And you see what I find fascinating about this and about seeing this together, you can see how her mind works, how every picture leads to the next picture and informs the next problem that she wants to solve. The next set of interactions that she wants to talk about. And the fascinating thing about her pictures is how precise they are. So there's always a balance in there. So we say it's not important what it's about. What is important about the materials is that that she combines these materials, this metal here, with this organic materials. And what she's interested in, what happens when I combine these? What happens when I have this yellowish tones here clash with these with these reddish tones here? This is what governs her, what interests her. Like this red dot here in the middle, this, which is basically in a tomato, but she is not interested in the tomato. She's just interested in the redness of the tomato. She continued with this until she eventually moved on. She moved on to making very elaborate constructed still lifes with very tiny objects here, like this tiny vase here. And here she begins to be interested in different things, different forms, different arrangements, eliminating the color for a moment allows her to concentrate on different things, concentrate on different aspects of form, combining this animal here with other objects, being very concentrated, reducing the image further. Until she eventually moves on to add the color back in. But the colors here now become different. They become more muted. They become quieter. Very different from the kitchen series on a formal level. But it's just a joy to flip through these kinds of books, because you see how her mind works while she moves from problem to problem. It is a catalog, so it is, in the end, it has a certain randomness to it. So sometimes you have no idea why, how this is sequenced. It's just not sequenced. It's just chronologically sequenced. It's just, I was interested in this, then I moved on. But it also has this kind of interesting working shots, which shows that she later in her career, when she moved to France, she used this kind of banquet camera, which is a huge beast of a camera, which makes enormously large negatives. And of course, this gear is not accidental to her, so it comes with her interested in solving problems. And it has some kind of quotes in here, which I find really interesting. There is nothing that I don't want to have experienced. So basically, this is what informs her. She was immensely curious and tried and experimented and tried things out and moved on and looked for different problems to solve. So I still wish, so here, that's what I meant with catalog. In the end, it gets random. It showed her whole life of photography, her portrait photography that she took up in the 80s. Catalogs of artworks, some artist books she made. But even in pictures like this here, you see that she's only loosely interested in the people she's photographing. She's more interested in what forms of the human body assumes when it is exposed to a camera. So even with the human form, she tried to solve formal problems here. It ends with a short article by her husband, Bruce Boyce, who was living with her most of her life. So some, yeah, and just a timeline of her life. So if you want to have an introduction to Jan Groover, this is the book to have. So that's a fascinating book. Let me move on. So there is one thing that one thing of critique that I have with this book. I would have wanted to have it bigger. I understand that this is to be affordable. It has to have this size, but I just want to show you in comparison this one. This is William Eggleston Outlands. This is a larger book, and it allows you to have more space for the images, more space for the photos. And I will show you in a minute what this kind of space and this kind of different layouts allow you to do. What does Eggleston have to do with this? I find this is an interesting edition of his work. So I only know the very traditional editions by Steidl. I know William Eggleston's guide, which is from the beginning of the 70s. They are very traditional photo books. This is in a way, this is a departure from this. So it begins with the size being larger than the usual books of Eggleston, even larger than the Democratic Forest. And they make interesting decisions here. So this is published by David Zwirner, the gallery that had a huge, large retrospective on the Outlands. So from outtakes from his work from the 80s and 90s. And this book makes it interesting to look at, to ask the question, what is Eggleston actually interested in? So why does he get up out of bed in the morning to go out and make photos? And he has been framed a lot of about coming from the South, making pictures of the South, documenting the South, the consumerism, the expanding economic forces in the US in the 60s and 70s, the breakdown of this consumerism after the oil crisis, and this is how he usually is framed. These are his topics, and on the other hand, yeah, his pictures are very beautiful. And if you approach this from a formalist point of view, you will encounter pictures like this. I can say, what is the documentary value of these kinds of pictures? And I find it interesting to frame him differently. And this is what this book does, because it focuses on not being focused just one picture with the same layout over and over again, but David Zwirner, frames these differently. So when he brings these formal aspects of his images out in a different way. So for me, Eggleston is very interested in making photos. This is his drive. And looking, solving pictures, solving formal problems. So he's giving himself these problem sets and he tries to solve them. And here in this image, which is kind of funny because you have this chicken here, but David Zwirner manages to blow it up, and then he exposes Eggleston's formal interest in here. Here is interested that the shoes are red, and there is some red in this chicken here, and this is what drives him to frame this, to compose this, because this is what the core of this picture is. And it's interesting to see. I've never seen Eggleston laid out in this way, with a picture and then just a detail from this picture blown up. And this highlights these formal aspects of him. This idea that he photographs things from the backside because he's not interested in making a documentary photo of this. He's not interested what's on the picture here. He's only interested in the formal aspects of this. And here you see his interest in material and deterioration, and how aging changes forms, changes paint. This is what he's interested in. And this goes through the whole book here. This is how this book is structured. It has these wonderful photos, but then we are following with this layout how Eggleston is drawn to images. He looks at these tiny details here, like this color clash here that happens here. And this, again, if you draw this back to the Bauhaus, this is the idea of interaction of colors. This is where his interests lie. Sometimes there is a hint of a story, like there is this wonderful sequence where he follows several children through the world, and you see them disappearing here. But here he is interested, and he puts himself in the shoes of these children, how they experience the world for the first time. They see color for the first time. They see these forms for the first time, and they are drawn to this. like he is drawn to this now. And then he immediately comes back to this one, which is just a great combination of pictures which show how he is drawn to a loaf of bread on a shelf, why he's interested in it, why he's interested in where it is framed. I just wonder if the bread was really at that place there, or if he moved it a little into the center of the picture. Sometimes, so Eggleston is not that clear as Jan Groover is. So sometimes you have pictures like this that have these kinds of stories here. So this is, it has this strong formal aspects of this. It looks in the background almost like a Roscoe picture of rats, but it has in the center, it has this motel, telephone here, which says room to room, long distance, local calls, and hotel operator, which immediately opens up some kind of road movie story, being in a motel, ordering room service, watching TV on the tube. But you look at spectacular photos like this, and you immediately see what is he interested in. And this is why I thought, okay, I would love to see Jan Groover in big, because this is too small for her pictures to actually work. And this here, the size of the Eggleston pictures, they really jump out of the page. Bauhaus, color field, interaction of colors. This is where his interests lie. And this is another of these fascinating shots where you see, okay, it's a red and the yellow that he's drawn to. And then he forms the whole picture around these color interactions here. And this is what these blow-ups bring out. So William Eggleston, The Outlines, wonderful book. Can't recommend it higher. And then let me end on one thing that is very current to this, and which basically brought me this idea of going back to the Bauhaus. This is Aaron O'Keefe's wonderful title, How Are Things? Aaron O'Keefe is a photographer, painter, a sculptor, and she makes these kinds of objects out of wood and paints them. And then she works with them. So this is her workshop, and even her workshop looks beautiful. Again, she's a painter, so she's very practical. So there's not a lot of artsy talk that you get from her. So you get a lot of, yeah, I had a visual problem, I tried to solve it. And these are her pictures that she made of this. And they look very close to paintings, but they are photographs. So they are basically these still lifes arranged on colorful backgrounds. Sometimes these are spectacularly simple, and they immediately remind me of this practice of the Bauhaus practices of dealing with forms. Oops. Quickly flips through this. But the interesting thing about this is this combination of photography, sculpture, and how the sculptures look in real life and how they look flattened out here. These kinds of perspective shifts that you have when you have something where the way something is painted contradicts the way the light falls when you have lit the actual picture in there. So there are all kinds of visual contradictions in these kinds of pictures. And it's very similar to the practice of Jan Gruber, being in the studio and working with these kinds of materials and yeah, crafting these pictures. This one here is spectacular. So it's always like every picture here is a spectacular feast for the eye. You just have to sink that in, because we do not understand what we're actually looking at. Because everything contradicts each other. And this is how she hangs these things in these brightly colored rooms. Here, this is a wonderful essay by Emily Labarche about the not knowing, about this idea of starting out on an experimental journey with her sculptures and not knowing what comes out of it. Wonderful essay on her work. And she coins this idea of Josef Albers and Johannes Itten and Werner, that they are doing chromatic writings, which I found a really spectacular way to phrase how Itten and Albers speak about photography, about color. And this is just, sometimes it's just spectacularly simple how these are. So first you see this as a simple painting here. Like this could be just a smudge of color in there, but only if you look closer, then you see, yeah, that this has actually been a three-dimensional sculpture. And this is just the way the sculpture works out. So she always moves between two-dimensionality, three-dimensionality. Super interesting way to deal with these kinds of formal problems that come up in the space between 2D, so the plane of the photograph, and 3D, how our world is. And sometimes it's super simple and super beautiful. But again, it's sculpture. All of this is photography, and it doesn't really, if I look at the screen, it doesn't really come out. But if you look at the book, it comes out. You see, when you stare at this long enough, everything starts to move. So it starts to move out of the page and back into the page. It's really fascinating photography. And this is probably my most beloved image in the book, because it pops out of this. It's a three-dimensional picture, but it looks like a two-dimensional picture. And then it's a photograph. So it is really, again, a two-dimensional picture. And there is a lot of care that has gone into the making of this book, into the essay that you see here, but also into this beautiful cover that you see here that takes up on the idea of two-dimensionality, three-dimensionality, this cutout that you see here. That was our little journey into formalism.
Very nice, Stefan. Thank you so much. Let me ask if anyone has a question they'd like to ask. I saw that Monique was asking something about the different perceptions of color. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? There's a different question. How do you think the new typographers like Louis Baltz fit in here?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That's the first time I've been thinking about this. Well, it's interesting because now that you mention it, Louis Baltz is in somehow it brings all these ideas full circle, because he is fascinated by the architecture, but by a very flat architecture. So he basically he turns everything, every building that he sees, which is a complex three-dimensional structure, into a flat five-sided object. So there's four corners and the one side that is facing the viewer. And this brings this buildings that are actually, that he takes actually from real life, that takes it back to the original drawings and like the Bauhaus people did. And the pictures that he made, they are sometimes very similar to when you compare this with architectural drawings that the people at Bauhaus did. Sometimes they look very similar to the minimalist photographs of Louis Balz. So for him, this is certainly true, that this comes in a way that comes full circle. And it's probably also true that he is very formal about his work. So he's very interested in how things look in a photograph and not so interested in what he's actually photographing here.
That question earlier, I think Monique had a microphone issue. She was saying, what about the different perceptions of colors and the recreation of our own little spheres?
I'm also not quite sure what this means, but let me try to answer with Josef Albers. So please look at the book Interaction of Color by Josef Albers, because this is really a wonderful book that he made on how do we actually perceive color. And he's very precise, very specific in when you combine these kinds of colors, when you have different interactions of use. This is how it makes an imprint on you. This is how it ends up on your retina. This is what makes it feel. The example of the jumping dog that we had a little bit earlier, that was about different ways of combining light and dark support the idea of jumping away from the page, and others have more gravity. So I have no idea if that really answers your question, but Josef Albers goes a long way in talking about how we perceive color and how it affects us, how it really is part of our world and then becomes part of our eye, which is part of our mind, which is part of our body. So we have always a relationship to color, a very intimate relationship to the colors that surround us.
Good. If somebody else has a question, just unmute and ask away. Maybe that's it, Stefan.
All right.
Much. This was really an epic talk for your 20th Photobook show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your patience. So it was quite a ride, but the 20th century was quite a ride.
It was wonderful. I want to go and see The Brutalist now. Definitely. I didn't know it was about sort of architecture.
Yeah, I can. I'm very mixed on The Brutalist. So yeah, I think it's worth seeing. It's a complicated movie. Let me leave it at that.
Quick question. This is
Sure.
my first class here. Can your other ones be seen somewhere?
I've actually put the link in the chat.
Oh, great. And are they all Photobook specific?
Yeah.
Yes. They all circulate around the Photobook. I think I've been deviating from classical photo books more and more into painting and design, but the earlier ones, they are really classical photo books in them. Michael Schmidt and Einar Schleef, stuff like that.
Oh, that's a great book. Waffenruhe?
Waffenruhe, yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. And I
Amazing. It
Yeah.
took me years to find that before it came back into print.
luckily they reprinted it, and they have reprinted so many of them that they're selling them for cheap now.
Yeah, well, you know, I found it when it wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Let me mention again, you can go to StrudelmediaLive.com to see what our upcoming classes are, and we hope to see you there or in the next episode of the Photobook show with Stefan Frank. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
It was great. Thank you so much.